Hello, I'm Stephen Foskett, and I'm the organizer of Tech Field Day, and we are here at Aruba Airheads Conference 2014 with a group of independent bloggers in the wireless space to talk about some interesting topics in Wi-Fi. Tom will introduce those topics in a minute. This whole video section, this whole segment will be posted. It's currently being live streamed at techfieldday.com, also on the Airheads community, I believe. Right, Sean? Right? Yeah, all right. And we thank you guys for inviting us, for having Tech Field Day be part of Airheads once again. I think this is the third time that we've done this. So thank you very much for inviting us and giving us a chance to talk about wireless topics here. We're going to be posting these videos also to YouTube. And those will also go up at techfieldday.com and on the Aruba Airheads community as well. Tom is going to introduce three topics. We're going to try to separate each three topics very clearly and try to keep time well so that we can have each of those three topics be a separate video, because I think that it would be interesting for people maybe to watch one of them and maybe not the other ones or something. So let's try to have a nice fair fight, no punching below the belt. Yes, we'll and the fact that people are lined up on opposite sides of the table does not imply that they hate each other. It just means that that's where they're sitting. So this is not a battle. All right. So with that being said, I am going to step out of the way and sit down. But I'd like Chris to introduce himself first in a moment, and we'll consider that the beginning of our video. Okay.
All right, my name is Chris Little. I run a blog at wifikiwi.com, and I'm on Twitter as wifikiwi.
Hi, I'm Craig Schnars. I'm at the Wi-Fi Guy, and I run the blog at thewifi-guy.net and on Twitter at the Wi-Fi Guy.
My name is Keith Parsons. I run a blog, wirelesslandprofessionals.com, and Twitter is Keith R. Parsons.
My name is Samuel Clements, on Twitter at Samuel_Clements. I run a blog at sc-wifi.com, and I'm co-host of the No Strings Attached show at nostringsattachedshow.com.
I'm Tom Hollingsworth. I'm an independent blogger at networkingnerd.net, and I am also on Twitter as NetworkingNerd.
And I'm Stephen Foskett. I'm on Twitter at sfoskett, and you can find me at blog.fosketts.net, and you can find Tom and I both at gestaltit.com and techfieldday.com.
All right, thank you all for joining us today. Let's get started with our first topic. We saw a great presentation during the keynote yesterday about the decisions that companies are starting to make about whether or not they need to go 100% wireless for all their end users, and what the implications of that would be. Let's talk a little bit about what it would take to build a 100% wireless environment inside of an enterprise today. How do we need to change our design methodologies when we think about that? And how does that impact our cabling needs? So obviously, if it's a greenfield environment, we don't have to pull nearly as many cables as we did before, or should we be pulling the same number of cables to support higher densities of access points? Who wants to start?
I'll take that first one there about the design methodologies. The actual copper strand count is going to go down, obviously, because we're not pulling strands into cubicles and walls. Though I think you need to be prepared and put more cables where you might anticipate more APs going. So, and the quality of the cables, obviously if you have Cat5, you need at least Cat5e or Cat6 going. And part of the discussion is also as we get to new AC APs that need more power, and do we need to bring two cables into them? Another thing that was showed in the keynote was, are we going to go from 1 gig cables to 2.5 gig cables, or greater than 1 and less than 10, some frame someplace in between there? Even then, do you still want to bring more cable pairs to every AP location?
Well, in my book, it's even more than that. It's you're also saving cable plant costs on analog lines, right? Those folks who aren't voice over IP to the handset today, they're doing regular old 1 pair or fax lines, analog lines, things along those lines. So it's more than just wiring to computers or wiring to desktop machines. It's also all of those intermediary voice devices in between, which I think are probably represent the bulk of the concerns from a performance perspective about how do you replicate that in a wireless infrastructure reliably. with enough bandwidth to service an end user's needs. You're shifting the access layer from a switch down to an AP, and your designs today call for maybe 10 gig uplinks to a switch. You're talking about pushing that uplink, like you said, down to a 2.5 gig link or 2 1 gig links down to an AP that's shared medium.
And the APs are taking the place of the aggregator, which used to be the switch to the aggregation. So now we have an aggregator in front of an aggregator, and how's that going to affect the rest of your wiring? It's going to. So I like your idea of the greenfield. That's the easiest one to do the design for. It's the going wireless where you already have cable planned in there. What are you going to do?
Well, and technology concerns aside, in an existing deployment, you have people who are so familiar with a wired handset, you have to retrain those users. That's a really, really big non-technical hurdle that's probably going to be the barrier to entry for a lot of folks having that conversation.
I have a lot of experience with wiring, especially in education environments, because it's a critical component of E-rate, and E-rate is a very archaic methodology for technology increase. They have specific call-outs for wiring. Wiring is like a very important component because we have to run a lot of wires. And one thing we always told our customers was running 6 wires to a location is cheap because the first wire is the expensive one. That's the one that I have to run my pull and do all that other stuff. Every extra wire on top of that is a minuscule additive cost. So we would always caution our customers, if you're going to run a wire to a building or to a classroom, you run 4. Because if you run 1, it's not cost effective. Now, with the advent of wireless technologies and soft clients and things like that, those wires now become kind of obsolete. But could we repurpose those wires? Maybe stick an access point in a classroom down at a lower level. I know there are some design considerations about sticking access points at ankle level, but can we reuse our existing cable plant if it's 5E or 6?
It's a big if. I'm guessing a lot of that cable you pulled wasn't 6.
Actually, right before I left my old job as a VAR, we had put in all of our RFPs that 6 was going to be a requirement going forward because of gigabit speeds and higher PoE density and things like that. And most schools were still running 5. And so it was decision time. Do we go from 5 to 6 and spend a little more money and be future-proof? Or do we just kind of go with 5E and hope it hangs on for another couple of years until we can get some more cable runs?
Well, that's one of the biggest questions I had about the 2.5 gig tease, if you will, which is there was no substance behind where it is we're looking to make this real world. Right? Is it what are going to be the cabling requirements? What are going to be so you say 2.5 gigs over a pair of copper or over over one run. What does it take in order to accomplish that?
Which IEEE standard is 2.5 gig again? I didn't hear that mentioned in the keynote.
I don't think that was actually put forward as being a current standard that was ratified.
So it's only going to be supported by Aruba?
No,
I don't think there's any details given on that.
Yeah, the thing I inferred from what they were saying was that they were submitting it as a standard to be put out specifically because of this use case. So it hasn't been ratified yet. The IEEE tends to take a while to standardize these things.
It's an idea, and we'll see where it goes. We need to design and know how to work within the current standards. I think to go back to the 100% wireless thing, the minimum requirement really isn't cable. It's the ability to design the Wi-Fi, the RF, to maximize its capacity. And we all know that you can keep throwing APs up and it doesn't add any more capacity, because once the frequency is used up, there's no more. So it's all a matter of how do we design. Now, I'll use the Airheads official term from the keynote yesterday of stable air. And I think that's still, to get 100% wireless, you have to make sure that the wireless actually works all the time and have the ability, when it has a failure, to be able to track it down and fix it. And though we're 10, 15 years into Wi-Fi, I'm amazed how many times people still mess up that very base thing. You have to take a client, connect wirelessly to an AP and put it on a wire. And if you can't do that part right, nothing else is going to happen. So the very foundation of 100% wireless is stable air. Okay, the RF's got to work.
Yeah, layer one, you have to get that right, and too many times do people, I mean, how many times have we heard, one AP per classroom, or God forbid, 2 APs per classroom, and you just can't take a conversation like that and then stop. You can't say, I'm going to do my RF design and it's going to be like this. You have to put some thought into how you're going to be doing your RF design. Are you going to expend the money for doing a site survey up front? Are you going to do a post-installation site survey and validate that? It's more than just buying some APs and throwing them up in a room. There's some heavy lifting that has to go along with that doesn't exist on the routing and switching side of the house.
And especially if you're looking at increasing the how much the wireless network's being used, because all of the devices, even devices that were previously wired like phones, are going to be now on the wireless network.
Yeah, because once you go to 100% wireless, there's more load, which even means you need to have better design.
Right.
And the problem with the whole 1 AP per classroom or 2, whatever it is that's a marketing idea.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, to tie the wireless and wired back together, contracting out to some contractor to pull Cat6 cable everywhere and then never validating it and then wondering why it doesn't work, and when it fails you come back and go, I wonder if we should have ever tested that. And yet in the wireless world we'll do some design, sell some APs, and then come back later and never do the validation. So how do you know it's actually in the air? And wireless is invisible. At least the cable, you can see that it was plugged in.
But for a long time, I mean, we've always looked at wireless as an additional network, and I think to your point, post-installation surveys are going to be critical. Pre-installation predictive analysis is going to be super critical, because if we put the APs up in the wrong spot, there's interference, they can't handle the load. It's not going to be like in the hotel today when the wireless is cutting out on us and we're like, oh, I'll just plug in. There's no plug. We got rid of all those. You're stuck.
Or I'll just tether, right? Or I'll just forego, right? If you're increasing the demand on the wireless infrastructure for something as critical as voice, I think is the hugest sticking point we have.
That actually brings up another aspect of maximizing use of the airspace as well, is when you have guests or employees that are coming in that are using their Wi-Fi hotspot, and it's interfering with the corporate wireless because you've got this carefully designed wireless network, and suddenly there's all these extra devices you didn't plan for being in the air.
Well, and
I call that reverse 3G offload.
Yes. I think a lot of it is people see site surveys and say, what is that? Site surveys should be called Wi-Fi design instead of site surveys. Do you need a site survey? I don't know. Do you need Wi-Fi design? Yes you do.
I kind of agree with that approach actually a lot. I tend to talk with customers about doing a wireless design rather than a site survey.
Yeah, the term survey is just overused and so misdefined or redefined by, you ask 10 different people what a site survey is and they're all going to give you a different answer. There's got to be some consistency in your approach to doing a design, and calling it something that's not a survey is by far and away a good way to tackle that.
I have a suggestion. In the wired world, we have Cat5, Cat5e, and there's specs for near side crosstalk, far side crosstalk, pinouts, twist ratios. I wish there was some Wi-Fi land, sorry, you're listening, some entity that could say voice grade Wi-Fi is blank and list out primary RSSI, secondary RSSI, co-channel interference, signal noise ratio, that we could have a category like we do in cabling that then is a standard we can meet, and if we meet that, then we can design to it. We're still out in the wild, wild west here with every vendor, every voice handset has a different requirement. So when we're designing for this 100% wireless, which device are we designing it for?
Well, and knowing your clients is of paramount importance when you're designing a wireless network, yet nobody has that insight. You walk into a customer and you say, hey, okay, you want me to design a wireless network for you, tell me about the devices that are going to be connected to that network, and they go, meh.
Anything, everything.
I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, has anyone seen a table that shows every client device and which ones support DFS or non-DFS? So
not enough of them.
We don't even know in a tabular format to be able to say, oh, we're designing this and you're having that device. Can I use DFS channels or not? And if I do, then this device is going to have a hole, but there's no central place where you can even find that list.
Yeah, so you have to assume basically that you can't use DFS.
Remember when in-user connectivity was just as simple as plugging a cable into a wall?
Yeah.
But 100%, we're not going to go that way.
Yes, no, 100% was. And Chris, you said something that was very important, which is what about interference from hotspots, transient users that are coming through your infrastructure. What's even worse is when you talk about interference from non-transient users, just as straight up as microwave ovens or analog cordless phones, or you get into a disaster situation and you've got to pick up a phone and call somebody, yet the recovery vehicles outside are whomping all over 2.4 gigahertz or whatever channel your AP's on. Those are concerns you just don't have in the real world. Not to mention E911 accessibility over voice over IP solutions. You have to assume that all that back-end services exists with feature parity from your cable service today, and then you have to overlay and you have to address all those other concerns on top of it.
Actually, that gets into an additional layer of this that we didn't think on as well, is all of the back-end services and making sure all of those back-end services integrate in with it. How many wireless phones do you know that don't support 802.1x? Whether all of the network is actually going to be able to handle additional load of authentication. So if you've got a good certificate infrastructure there in place to be able to deal with all the different devices you're using, how you're going to get those devices that have never been connected to a network actually with all of the information in place on them to be able to correctly join the network in the first place.
And where the heck am I going to find a fax machine with a wireless card?
Exactly. And a printer. Well, the printers do have that there.
Manufacturing plant, how would you find like a stamping press?
I think we've discussed and we have lots of questions, and we didn't come up with any solid solution, which tells me 100% wireless is a topic that we're going to be talking about for a while in the future.
Long time.
I agree.
And it's ironic, isn't it, that when you start talking about 100% wireless, the first thing you talk about, wires.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I know that we glossed over the site survey part of it a bit, but at least the way we work as a managed service provider, that seems to be our biggest hurdle, because we tell the customer we need to do a site survey so we can deploy this network properly. And they say, well, that's too much. And we say, well, we'll do a passive site survey. Well, how much is that? Well, we'll do a construction site. Well, and they keep asking what the cost is. And what we realize is that once we put the access points in, we get problems, as you all stated. And I know the gentleman here on the right mentioned wireless design. And I guess my real question is, how do you tell the customer this is important? You're going to save money if you allow us to do this, even if you allow us to do it for 5 of, let's say, if you're 15 or 20, 30 sites, just so we can get an idea of what's going on in your environment.
So, some of that takes a little bit of gumption, and I know that there are partners, or there are services organizations that simply won't sell you a solution unless you purchase a site survey. It's part of a package deal, and if you start trying to peel off a la carte options, they'll just simply say, sorry, we're not going to take your money, and that's a hard pill to swallow, especially from a partner perspective, is because you have a dollar figure you've got to hit. You want to make a sale. On the infrastructure side of the house, you want to be able to get in and sell your solution and not have your competitor come in and sell a solution. And so it's this constant struggle between trying to do something right versus trying to be the first one in the door, and then we'll get it in, and then once you're stuck with us, we'll fix it later. I mean, I've heard many an infrastructure manufacturer say, nah, don't worry about it. If you have holes, we'll give you a couple of APs to backfill that later. And it's like that conversation it's not just about the cost of a $500 or $600 AP or whatever. It's all of those other costs that come along with it. Not to mention, okay, I'm going to drop an AP and plug a hole, which is going to cause a ripple effect throughout my infrastructure and cause all my neighboring APs to turn down, which is going to cause all the next APs to turn up, and it's going to create this cascading problem that really should have been addressed up front. How do you tackle that? I don't know, but when you live in an industry of lowest bidder or bottom bin components, or competitive nature of hey, I'm going to exploit your lack of understanding because you believe it's just number of APs, I'm going to tackle that by saying, don't worry about it, I'll give you a couple APs on the back end if you need them. That's absolutely one of the biggest problems we have.
And I deal with your problem every day. That's the people ask. Yep. So I just kind of in my practice, never put it as a la carte. It's the cost. You cannot do a wireless design, implementation, and validation. You can't separate them, because without one, you don't have the others. So you can just go and sell a bunch of APs and put them up, and then you're back doing remediation the entire time. So just don't allow it. you know that you have to do the upfront design, and you must do a validation survey, or you don't know if it's up. There's really no option. And so when you say that way, if it's a wired network, you don't say, we'll sell you switches, but we won't do any design. We won't do any cabling. We won't even look to see where your risers are. We're just going to give you the switch. They don't do it on wired, so why do they expect it from wireless?
And you know, I've seen some customers, I've seen some partners address that as, you know, okay, fine, we'll sell you this gear. By the way, it's going to come with this big old long disclaimer that's going to be attached to your invoice. And by the way, we do great remediation work. And when you come back to us for remediation work, our hourly rates are going to be this, and we expect the cost of remediation to be 50% more than what we're expecting to charge you up front for design services. Just be aware that when this doesn't work, you're going to have to come back and you're going to have to pay us more. And oh, by the way, you're going to have to move a bunch of cables. Education, I think, is key to something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we've tried, and we've got pushed back both ways. We'll say, you know, we can do the site survey now, or we're going to do remediation later. But we guarantee you, we're going to do one or the other. And because it just doesn't work that way, where you just throw it up there and it works. Now, there is this one issue regarding wireless design cutoff. Like, do you, at what point is a wireless design unnecessary? I mean, we do QSR sometime, and they want it inside of, let's say, the food court. So you're like, you know, that's one access point. We don't need to really design it, because the QSR doesn't really care about the access as much as, let's say, a retailer, or let's even say a hotel. They just want to say they have Wi-Fi just to say they can put a free Wi-Fi on their like a little decal on their window. But when you had that kind of middle ground, well, it's not a large hotel and it's not a QSR, it could be someone it could be a supermarket. And so now you're trying to justify the cost, but then they're all about the margins.
I mean, so, in my opinion, wireless design is important once you exceed 3 access points. As a general rule of thumb, right, there's always exceptions to the rule, but you know, when it becomes important is when you start having to deal with channel reuse, which is exactly what your point was, right? Once you have to start dealing with, there's only a finite amount of space in the spectrum to use. When do you fill up your spectrum? Well, you fill up your spectrum at 3 APs. 3 non-overlapping channels is sort of your worst case scenario. So you estimate based on whatever your application needs are. I'm going to look for hotspot coverage, and so I'm going to estimate 5,000 square feet in AP. Something ridiculous because I'm just doing data-only services or whatever. That means that 3 times 5 is 15,000 square feet. Your customer comes to me with 12,000 square feet and says they want hotspot coverage. Cool. Here's your 3 APs. Put them in the corners.
And it really doesn't matter where you put them either.
It really doesn't matter where you put them. Yeah, you just kind of keep them far apart from each other, and you'll be fine.
I think there's an additional point to make on that, though, is that's only valid in a greenfield environment. If you're putting it in a mall where there's already wireless operating in other businesses that isn't yours, you're still going to get the interference from those APs, even though you don't own them.
Another place where it gets difficult, I don't know the term you use for takes guts or gumption.
Yeah.
A real place where it takes gumption is when they want, we have 10,000 seats in the stadium divided by a number of people. That means we need, 200 APs, and they're going to be on one room and they can see each other. And you have to just be able to say, this facility with where you let us do it, the frequency reuse stops here. I can't give you any more frequency reuse, which means I cannot give you any more capacity. And salespeople have a really hard time doing that. And yet I could sell you more, but you're not going to actually get any more capacity. And so we need to stand up and say, we understand how that stable air, how the Wi-Fi design works, and when the frequency is filled, that's it.
Well, and every manufacturer is guilty of wanting to sell more APs. Every manufacturer is guilty of, hey, I've got a piece of software that's going to do that math for you, right? I've got 2,000 square feet, I want hotspot coverage, here you go, you need 4, we'll call it 5 APs, here's your bill of materials, have fun. And they sort of make they very much make it very easy to come up with an easy to digest number that means nothing. It means that you should consider the source, right? When you get something from an infrastructure manufacturer, regardless of who it is, and they want to tell you blah number of square feet per AP and done, then that should be a warning flag to anybody.
Well, even some of the professional tools, the predictive tools, don't have a counterweight to, you put in, I have X number of clients, so I need X number of APs. There's no counter rate to say, we ran out of frequency, so you can't do that anymore. And in discussions with the developers, they said, how do we tell our customers, you guys who are buying this software to predict where your Wi-Fi go, how do we tell them that they can't do it? Is that our job as a predictive tool? And so they left it open-ended.
Yes.
And so our job using the tools is to know when we have to stop.
When you gotta say stop.
Yeah.